Attachment theory was originally developed by John Bowlby out of Cambridge University and later Mary Ainsworth. And then, I actually learned about it in first year university back, however many years ago that was, 16 years ago or so. And it was really high level, where it talked about how, our adult relationships have a big influence on how we learn to attach to others. But there was really not much discussion in terms of how we can change our attachment style, and not enough discussion, in my opinion, around how this actually affects our adult romantic relationships and even friendships, co-working relationships, family interactions as adults. And so this is where a lot of my research began, was diving into this a lot more deeply. And so there are 4 major attachment styles. I really like to think of our attachment style as this subconscious set of rules we have about how to give and receive love and how to connect with other people. And every single person has an attachment style. So this affects everybody on the planet. And the 4 attachment styles are: number 1, the anxious attachment style; number 2, the fearful avoidant; number 3, the dismissive avoidant; and number 4, the securely attached style. So if you'd like, I can kind of break down a little bit about each
Please.
style and how they're really formed.
Yeah,
So
I love it.
awesome. So the secure style is basically the style that we want everybody to become, if they're not already. And for myself, I was definitely not a secure attachment style. It's quite rare nowadays for somebody to be securely attached through their upbringing. Research a few decades ago showed it was about 50% of the population, but now current research is showing that quite dramatically trending downwards. So we have the securely attached style. They develop because in childhood, they have what we call approach-oriented behaviors from their parents. So what this means is that if a child cries or it fusses or is upset, the caregiver or parent will go towards them and will try to soothe them and figure out what's going on. So there's this baseline in the background of what is known as attunement or presence from the caregiver. They're tapped into what the child is feeling and experiencing. Now, this may seem like a small thing, but it has a really huge impact, because when a child can't speak the language yet, can't understand that a caregiver is not going to just abandon them out of the blue, and knows they're completely dependent on their caregiver for survival, then having that caregiver be attentive, be there, be present, try to soothe you when you're crying, it actually gives a child in their upbringing all of this messaging or conditioning that says, I can trust other people. It's safe to rely on other people. It's safe to give and receive love. I am confident in who I am. I'm worthy of having my emotions expressed and seen and heard, and I can communicate, and that's safe. So statistically, we have securely attached children turn into securely attached adults, and they tend to do the best in relationships. They thrive the most in relationships, and they report not only the most long-lasting relationships, but also they report feeling happy and satisfied the most in their relationships. Most people nowadays are not securely attached. So this is where we have the 3 insecure attachment styles. At one end of the continuum, if you will, there is an anxious attachment style. This individual usually has very loving parents, but they experience either real or perceived abandonment in their upbringing. And this looks like they could have a parent who, leaves or passes away at some young age. Or it could be that there are 2 very loving parents, but they work a lot. So they're constantly traveling for work. So this child grows up to really have positive conditioning about love and really want that love and connection, because when it's there, it's really nice. But there's this background conditioning of feeling like love is always taken away. Love is there, love is taken away. Parents are there, they're traveling a lot. Parents are there, they're traveling a lot. Repetition and emotion is what conditions our subconscious mind. And literally, these are our subconscious set of rules about love. We're not consciously deriving these things and thinking them through as adults. They're these natural programs that we've acquired. And so what ends up happening is somebody from an anxious attachment household grows up to be quite afraid of abandonment. And they often have these big wounds around feeling afraid of being abandoned, disliked, rejected, excluded, and they really cope with these things by trying to maintain proximity. So as adults, these are the individuals who sometimes can be needy or clingy in relationships and call a lot or text a lot and really derive a lot of their sense of self-worth from closeness to other people, rather than having this more deep intrinsic sense of self, which can make them very sensitive to rejection and very afraid of people leaving them. On the other end of the continuum is our dismissive avoidant, basically the opposite of the anxious attachment style. They grow up with this overarching theme of childhood emotional neglect. And so what happens is a child, when they need that attunement, biologically we're wired for attunement and attentiveness from our caregivers. When that's not there because parents are emotionally unavailable, this child grows up to go, there must be something wrong with me that I can't get this need met. And so they actually internalize a lot of shame. And sometimes emotional neglect isn't like very overt. Sometimes it's not like, oh, the parents are never there. The vast majority of the time, it's very covert. It's like, at school on time, food is on the table, everything's good. But if you cry, go in the other room and come back when you're ready to stop crying. Or children should be seen and not heard. Or don't be a crybaby, toughen up, stiff upper lip. Like these types of messaging cause a child to be like, okay, this emotional part of myself is wrong and I need to divorce myself from it. And so this child grows up to basically try to stay as far away as they can from their own emotions, because this is their adaptation to cope with that kind of childhood. So they get afraid of too much attachment and too much closeness because it makes them feel vulnerable and emotional, and they associate that with being weak and shameful. So this adult becomes somebody who's constantly keeping people at arm's length. And if people get too close, they like really push them away. And of course, it's often that anxious and dismiss avoidance end up in relationships together and get into this push-pull cycle of like, come close, and the other person's like, get back. And then last but not least, we have the fearful avoidance, sometimes referred to as the disorganized attachment style. This is what I was growing up. And this attachment style is characterized by having a lot of chaos in childhood. So it could be like a bad divorce, an addict parent, an alcoholic parent. The overarching theme is like you never really know what you're going to get in your household. Sometimes there can be really loving and nice experiences, and other times there's like chaotic and confusing experiences. And so this child grows up to like want love and closeness and yearn for it, and they share in that anxious side. Like they want that closeness, they're afraid of people pulling away, but they also, just like the dismissive avoidant, fear closeness. So it's this funny dichotomy of like, I want closeness, and then somebody gets close and you're like, wait, get back. And you can't really tell which side of the fence you're on. So fearful avoidance tend to be very hot and cold in relationships, tend to be very push-pull. They can be very present and giving, but they can really withdraw and retreat a lot in relationships. And they tend to feel very confused. Like, do I want closeness or do I not want closeness? And they flip-flop a lot as adults, which obviously makes them quite confusing partners to be with. But the best news of all of this is that no matter what your attachment style is, you can heal to become securely attached. And it not only heals the relationship to yourself, but actually will transform completely your relationships to others too.
Yeah, it's a great definition and breakdown, and highly recommend to gather more information on this. Go to the YouTube channel, just go down the rabbit hole, because you break down intimacy, you break down like how they see themselves, how they receive love, like all these types of things. And I found myself thinking about the earliest version of me in relationships and the chaos that I created because I was so confused.
Yeah.
And I think I was exactly what you described, which is
Fearful avoidant.
the chaotic, yeah, 100%. And it's that need for the attention, but then being afraid that it's going to go away, or there's no real safety, and you're constantly seeking safety.
Yes.
And yet you don't find it in someone else. You have to find it internally first. Like you have to create that internal version. And so I think we heal ourselves as we get older, as the more we learn about ourselves. I always say I'm very grateful that I met my wife after I had screwed up a couple of relationships, because it allowed me to learn what was acceptable, what was unacceptable, what I needed to feel. And I've said this on the show before, but it's listening to the styles also is really interesting, because if you are the partner that gets into a disagreement, I'm the one that wants to talk it all out. Like I want to go right now, right? I go as deep as we can go. Like I'm breaking down your parents in 5 seconds of your relationship. I'm like, tell me about your mother. What was she like? Do you feel loved by your mom? Do you, and people open up to you. Like part of being a podcaster, like it's awesome. We get some of the greatest uh conversations because people feel safe, because I will talk about things other people won't talk about, and there's a safety to it. um but in listening to that, I will not go into the way what I think my wife might be, or what, I actually sent her 2 videos. I said, pick me and pick you, and of your YouTube channel. So I'll have fun with that later after the interview. But
Wait, what do you think
um
she was? What do you think she is?
I think she's dismissive. I think
Ah,
she's dismissive.
yeah.
But but I would let her define that. Like I think that, but at the end of the day, we were married 21 years and honestly, we're really a great match and we've grown together. I could tell you right now, I probably broke up with her in a long distance relationship every weekend. Every weekend. And
This
every
was
single
me before my
I
husband. This was me in every past relationship before him.
yeah,
I did the work
yeah,
before my husband now, but I totally relate to you.
yeah, so I would break up with her and then she would call me. She stopped taking my calls. Like this was pre-texting, thank God, by the way, because I can't imagine what I could have written. But I would get a call from her the next morning and she'd say, "Are you over yourself?" And I would say, "Yeah, I'm sorry." And we would move on.
Good for her.
And
Good
I
for
would not be married, we would not have the family we have, we would not be great parents together. We learned each other's strengths and our blind spots, and we grew together, and there's still remnants of those things as we get older. There are times where you hit really, really challenging moments, and you might fall back on some of them, but I found it so interesting to listen to this, and I've read about attachment theory back again in the early days of college, and I remembered some of the things, but not to this level, and the way you described it to relationships was so powerful to me.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so powerful to understand this because I think the first part that happens is that we start realizing our own patterns and we start realizing, oh, my partner doesn't love the way that I love necessarily. And I think that's its own breakthrough. My husband, when we first met too, we had both done a lot of work prior to our relationship. So we definitely had like some secure attachment in there, both of us. And I'm sure that's the case for you and your wife now after 21 years.
I don't know that we had it early. I think just to interrupt for 1 second, I would imagine that we built it together,
Yeah.
and I'm very grateful because we got married in our early 20s. So we were still figuring it out, but we figured it out together.
Yeah, which
And
is
we had
so
commitment,
beautiful.
which is crucial.
Yes. And with commitment and the willingness to learn and do the work, we can adapt. And so like there's the hard way of doing things, which is probably the way that you end up doing it, which is committing but never giving up and learning things through like the hard way and tough discussions. And then there's like a much hopefully easier way for anybody listening, which is like you don't have to feel around in the dark. You can just recognize, oh, this is my attachment style. These are my fears. These are my needs. These are my emotional patterns. These are what I need to do with my boundaries and communication. And this is my partner, and this is their rules for love. And not only can we change the fears and concerns that are not serving us, but we can also make sure that we're learning each other's fears and concerns and have healthy strategies to work through them. And that's really the system that we built, is to help people shortcut that what can be a very difficult and long process. The process that I went through took me about 3-4 years to figure it out because I didn't have a sort of framework and shortcut. And it's funny because my husband, by the way, is when we met, he was dismissive avoidant. So we share the same pairing, the fearful avoidant,
Yeah.
dismissive avoidant, and they make for good matches together. Absolutely. But it also, you have to do that work. Otherwise it's going to be really tricky because you can also have like, you can really hit each other's pain points in the relationship if you're not aware of it too. So the system we built was really, how can we shortcut this process? So once we learn our attachment style and the way that we love, we realize not everybody loves the way that we love. Fearful avoidants love through depth, right? They love through like, let's get down to the root cause. They're really good at making people feel seen, and they're drawing information out of people and having that transparency and deep connection. But dismissive avoidants love through often acts of service and
Yeah.
more indirect, less vulnerable things. And they're very grounding, and they'll tell it how it is for you. And that's their way of loving a lot of the time. And anxious attachment styles love through like being so thoughtful, and they tend to love through like being very, very giving and sometimes a little too people pleasing for their own good. But once we realize, oh, people love differently than we do if we have a different attachment style, we can learn their rules for love, our rules for love, and how to work those out, but also how to change the rules that are no longer working for us. So things that would have probably caused you, for example, or myself in past relationships to break up with somebody all the time, like these ideas that, well, I'm always going to be abandoned or betrayed anyways eventually. So the more I get close to somebody, the more, as a fearful avoidant, I would be terrified. It was scary. It was like, oh my gosh, I know the more I love, the more I'm just going to be hurt. So this you have this like bittersweet experience of being in love or falling in love, where it's nice, but it's terrifying and overwhelming. And it causes you to need to push people away out of self protection. And so when we realize, like, oh, those rules are dysfunctional rules, let's reprogram them and change them, it really opens up this capacity for us to heal and thrive in relationships in a much easier way.
Yeah, it's so important to have the awareness. And I think in when you grow up the way that I did, I tend to I'm diagnosing things like 10 minutes ahead or sometimes 5 years ahead. And so the challenge is it's great when you're a CEO and you're building a company. It's great when you're looking so far and you're watching trends, but when you see them in a relationship, you're definitely intense, and that intensity can be a lot. And it's funny, we have some friends that occasionally, they're very close friends, and they would say things like, the wife will sometimes say, why don't you more like Scott? And I'll look at her and I'll be like, if he was more like Scott, you would have been divorced in like 30 seconds. Like the two of us together would have completely broken the world. And you have to have that balance. So the benefit is having someone like my wife who balances me, who will say, hey, let's not tell everyone we're going to do something over the next 3 days. Let's have a night where we go to bed early, we eat a quiet dinner at home, we like that. And I wake up and you feel so much better the next day. But I almost needed that equilibrium, that balancing, and it allows you to start to see things about yourself through the other person. And I think that's what you're describing. And I did not do any work ahead of time, but we definitely worked it out together, which I think is fun. But as I listen to your breakdowns, even the stuff that goes into the strengths, like some of these things are really great strengths. It's not always that it's blind spots, right? These are things that people can leverage and utilize in their careers with their families as mothers, as fathers. And as long as it doesn't go into the crazy part where it gets really challenging. If you like clips like this, I have a similar clip here. And if you want to watch the full video, click here.